Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stuff I Find Interesting, episode 5, hopefully just one part. And even though I did talk for less time last time, it was still a pretty good chunk of time. So we're going to keep working on the pacing, see if we can tighten it up, along with figure out sort of the framing of it all, right? Because it has to be interesting. People have to say, "Oh wow, I want to check that out." And not like fade out halfway through, which might be happening. And I wouldn't be offended if it was. I mean, I'm probably going to fade out halfway through. It's a Thursday morning, and I'm doing this now because my man is not here, and so it's quiet. It's very quiet. We've got a beautiful beautiful sunrise coming up right now. The sky's all purple and pink and sort of like these colors. It's very nice. Anyhow, last time we were talking about the World's Fair and the conspiracy that the World's Fair was really just a series of events that displayed the buildings of the old world and then they were knocked down and pretended to be temporary. So I don't know. You probably lost me there, but when you see pictures like this, it's easy to understand why people might think these are not temporary structures, especially to our eye, right? Like, we don't make things quite this fancy anymore. And we don't budget for things this fancy anymore. Like, this was like just a huge deal, kind of like the Olympics. Oh, this year the World's Fair is going to be in St. Louis. This year the World's Fair is going to be in Louisiana. And it was considered like a really, really a big thing, and there were some places that would lobby to get the World's Fair because they knew it would increase their revenue for the city in terms of tourism and people coming in, because these things went on for like 5 months, which is a pretty good chunk of time. Here we have the Eiffel Tower. I'm just showing you some more pictures. We have the watch section of this particular World's Fair. I think this is in 1889. Yes. And just gorgeous, beautiful pictures. Also, photography was different back then, right? We have pictures that come out instantly. These pictures, they took time. They were processed in a lab. So that the level of detail is just incredibly intense. And then you have the sort of the old color, which our brains are programmed to look at and say, oh, well, that must be an old picture. Also, you get what's called the vanilla sky effect. And I don't know if anybody knows what that means. I didn't know what it meant. I had to look it up. Vanilla sky is when the background of an old photo is faded out and it looks vanilla. For example, here we have the sky. And there are conspiracy theorists who say that the reason why there's a vanilla sky is because the photos have been deliberately altered to hide stuff in the back. What? I don't know. Aliens? Stuff in the back. That's all I know. So we talk about the World's Fairs. Here's a list of World's Fairs, and we can see we have started with London in 1851, and the most recent one was in Dubai in 2020. Rio de Janeiro is in 2023, but it may be rescheduled, and Osaka is in 2025. So, again, a big deal. Not as big of a deal as it was back then. This was like the primary form of entertainment. People would just travel from all over to see this. Now, I just want to take a minute to talk about some unfortunate things that have to do with the World's Fair. On a serious note, there's the kind of humorous aspect of the conspiracy theory, but the World's Fair was extremely racist in 1904. Now, interestingly, in 1889, W.E.B. Webb had a sort of like a full sort of building that honored African Americans and their achievements, and it had photos of families, and it had books. And this was in 1889. And then in 1898. Then in 1904, we were displaying African Americans. So this gentleman purchased some random people and passed them off as pygmies. And that's horrible, right? Now we have this cute young boy, and he he was also displayed as a pygmy, and he was in an actual cage. And these folks were in a display that was designed so that people actually walked over them and looked down. Just horrible stuff. So we're going to move on. We're going to move on. But it's important to talk about this, right? I doubt that all of you have heard about that. Like, you'll be like, oh, wow, that's really awful. Yeah, it is really awful. And this was in 1904, which really wasn't that long ago. It was, what, like 40 years? Obviously, I'm joking. Last time we were talking about concretions, which were the rocks where you'd have a little grain or speck of something, and then it would build up some stuff and build up some stuff and build up some stuff. And we were talking about the living stones of Romania. We were also talking about gobi agates. I just wanted to let you know about another neat thing, because I love rocks, and these are septarian nodules. What is a septarian nodule? It is a fossilized mud bubble. So these are fossilized mud bubbles, which you can buy for the low price of $1,430 for a rock. I'm in the wrong business, folks. That doesn't mean people are getting that, but if we go down much like the gobi agates, people are definitely getting at least $100 for some of these specimens, for sure. And you can see there's different kinds. There's kinds where we have what's called a druzy agate, which is where you have those little kind of like pieces that stick out that are rough. You can have one that's smooth. It's been, sort of sheared off. This one probably, oh yeah, that one has drusies too inside. Some of them are solid all the way through. And yeah, so those are septarian nodules, and now you know. This is a photographer named Solomon Burke, and he's one of the most popular known photographers of the Wild West when we were building up that area and people were going out in that direction. Go west, young man, go west, or head west, or whatever the quote is. But it basically, if you could purchase land for like a really small amount of money, and as long as you built a house on the land and worked the land and produced a certain amount of croppage or something, which basically proved that you live there, then you could own it outright. I believe I have that correct. So his life was just an absolute mess. This poor guy, he's super famous now, and at the time of his life, he went through a lot. People said he was a little bit out of step with the rest of the world. He had a knack of failing for things. Boy, do I know about that. He was born in Virginia, 1856. His father worked for the railroad. And then his father said, hey, let's go west for the Homestead Act. And then he moved with his dad out west. And so the Homestead Act, signed into law by Abraham Lincoln in 1862, allowed any American, including freed slaves, to put a claim up for 160 free acres of federal land. A homesteader had to live on the land for 5 years and improve it by building a dwelling at least 12 by 14 feet in size and growing crops. Then the homesteader could file for his deed of title. So Butcher went out west with his dad, and he had a really, really horrible experience. And he said, I had seen just enough of the Wild West to unfit me for living contentedly in the East. So he felt out of place back in the East after he went west. I had that phrased wrong. So he had it like in his blood. He wanted to go west. But he started taking pictures out west. He found some families who agreed to be photographed. He supported himself by getting pre-orders. Hey, I've got this camera. I can take some pictures of you. And he was literally there while the country was being born, taking pictures of these places that are no longer empty. They're full of people. So then there was a drought, and then there was a depression, and he had to move back east. And he was penniless. Then he moved to another town. Then he worked as a justice of the peace. And after 3 years, he had almost worked his way out of debt. But then his house burned down, and he lost all of the photographs that he had taken up to that point, with the exception of some glass plates, which were in a granary. So he tried to say, hey, buy more subscriptions. But he didn't get enough money. He said he was going to print a book. He didn't get enough money to print the book. But then he wrote a book called Pioneer History of Custer County and Short Sketches of the Early Days in Nebraska with lots of photographs. And it was a hit. The first edition of 1,000 copies sold out before delivery. And so Butcher was like, yeah, I'm feeling good. And then he like got sick of photography. He was like, okay, I'm done with that. So then he was selling farmland, and then he was working as a door-to-door salesman. At 61 years old, he moved into real estate. Then he moved back to being a salesman. And he sold grain, then flour, and then one of his own inventions, which was called an electromagnetic oil detector, and a cure-all medicine he called Butcher's Wonder of the Age, which he claimed healed all sorts of ailments, but which was mostly just alcohol. When none of those games worked, he moved to Colorado to be closer to his daughter. And he died unknown. So it talked about how homesteaders often lined up their most prized possessions in order to show how much they really owned. One woman was embarrassed of her sod house, but the proud owner of a pump organ and requested that the family be photographed with it instead. They dragged the organ out into the yard. Farm animals and wagons can be seen in the background, and then dragged it back into the house after the photo was taken. So, a kind of a neat little snapshot. So here's to Mr. Burke. Random pictures now. It's random picture time. I have no idea who this guy is. I have no idea where this is. I saw this picture, and it just seemed like this man was having a very quiet, sort of pensive moment. Just kind of, you can almost hear the hush of the late afternoon. Maybe everybody else is asleep. But check out this cool building. All right. Next we have, look at this. Who needs electric cars when you could have bison? I thought this was a random thing because, look, they're like laughing, but it's not a random thing. Look, zebras, another bison. So, this was in Reddit, and it said that the zebras didn't really work out so well. So these are zebras of Buckingham Palace, and I guess it was just to show off how much money they had. But they didn't work out well. I guess zebras don't have a very good temperament, or aren't really able to be tamed or domesticated. And then someone here says, not to mention,
Biore blemish patches. Absorb plus an.
All right, it says why zebras are bastards. But you know what? We're not going to watch that because it could be something bad. I need to screen everything. Okay, here's another picture. This is the 1862 Pacific Railroad Act, which spurred the Union Pacific to complete a transcontinental rail link. So this is all kind of tied in with the Homesteader Act. The company's opening up. Things are happening. People are moving west. There's gold being discovered. There's mining going on. There's lots of industry. There's lots of immigrants pouring into the country. This is just a very cool picture of the railroad. Look, we got this dude over here, and get these two guys sitting on the train. He's just sort of hanging out, looking. You can see the bed of the rail is raised. We've got these two other guys back here. These guys are moving some stuff, I think, on one of those carts. And then we have this magnificent bit of geology. So, but the downside of increasing the size of the country and then connecting it by railroad is some problem spots started to come up, right? Like, not everybody was getting along, and that became more apparent as things started to open up, because people from the north go south, people from the south go north, they go west, and they're like, oh, we don't like those people over there. Oh, we don't like those people over there. And stuff got heated. This is a late medieval, early Renaissance crane. So this is what would have been used to lift very large objects. Inside there's like wheels and ropes and pulleys and stuff. And I believe it's operated in this little area here, and then there's some people in the front. But that's just wild, right? Just absolutely wild. This is a mosque that was built in 1399 in Turkmenistan. So one of the stands. The stands have very cool stuff. And if we look, we've got this little guy down here. Look at how good the quality of this photo is that I can enlarge it so much. And it's like, bam! This person's standing there. You can see the bricks starting to kind of fade away. And then we've got some work going on here. Now, if we look at this, built in 1399, and we see how weathered it is, and then we think about the stuff we were looking at last time with Turpin and the stuff in the desert, it's clear that stuff is like way older, right? Because this is similar structure in terms of material, similar conditions, and the ones in China in the Shaoxing area are just wrecked. I mean, by like a lot. Now, these are women who committed crimes in the late 1800s. And here we have Fanny Ekoff, who committed the crime of Fagin. I'm not sure what that is. Then we have this young lady, and her name is Esther, and Esther Disorderly House. Next up, we have Lily Bates. Lily Bates, crime was Badger. Oh, this is 1909, so this straddles late 1800s, early 1900s. Then we have Sadie Schoen in 1908, swindling. Sadie doesn't look very remorseful. She's like, yeah, I did it. I'll do it again. And then next we have this poor lady, Maggie Moore, malicious mischief. She just looks like she's had a hard, hard life, right? And then last we have Catherine Prenzel, rape. Well, that's terrible. That's terrible. Okay. I didn't read that before I threw it up, and I should have. We're trucking along. Okay, so next, I just want to talk real quick about insects. So insects are very small, yet they're so incredibly important, right? And bees, pollinators of plants, other bugs, pollinators. There are bugs that have destroyed things, bugs that have fallen from the sky. There have been just all kinds of things. So there's a wonderful book called Wicked Bugs, The Louse That Conquered Napoleon's Army and Other Diabolical Insects, and it talks about how bugs have changed the world. Back in the late 1200s, there's examples that they would fill baskets up with bees or wasps or something, and they would lob it over the wall. And in World War II, the Japanese were actively working on a program to drop plague-infested fleas by air. They were building these clay bombs that they put fleas in that had been infected with the plague. And they actually did that in China, and there were small outbreaks of plague. They were planning to do that in California, and they called it Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night. Obviously, that didn't happen. We use bugs to fight wars. People will encounter all kinds of bugs on the battlefield. And even today, there's out in the Middle East, our soldiers, there's the thing called a Pederis beetle, which can really kind of welt you up. And so George Washington had malaria, and he almost went deaf from the treatment of it because he took so much of it, because he was sick for so long, and then he got medicine. He was like, ah. And it probably changed the country a little bit. And there's a story about Darwin. He was a bug collector, and he had 3 beetles. And he didn't know what to do with the third one, so he put it in his mouth for safekeeping. But then he discovered that it sprays nasty fluid, and he got shot. So let's talk about Albert's swarm. Albert's swarm was an immense concentration of a Rocky Mountain locust that swarmed the western United States in 1875. It was named after Albert Child, a physician interested in meteorology, who calculated the size of the swarm to 198,000 square miles. So if you've ever read Little House on the Prairie, I believe that this particular swarm is mentioned and what it did to the Ingalls crops. The insect that painted Europe red. This is by far one of my favorite stories that I found last year. And that is that there's a beetle in Oaxaca, Mexico, that's basically kind of responsible for the Renaissance. So truly vibrant red in paint was not was not readily available. There was purple. Purple didn't come from a bug, but it did come from this snail, like this mollusk, that has this dye that they would cook down and then they would extract the dye. Red was elusive, right? So then it was discovered that by crushing up this bug from Mexico, you could create this really rich dye that lasted and didn't degrade. It was able to to hold its, when you painted it, it stayed on the shade, on the canvas and stuff. So the old recipes used to involve cow dung, rancid olive oil, bollock's blood, all kinds of weird stuff to try to keep it. Brazil would lack lichens, but the resulting colors were usually underwhelming and often resulted in brownish or orange reds that faded quickly. So here we have a woman collecting cochineal insects from the cacti. So cochineal insects are the ones that create this deep red color called an acid called carmine, and it comes from an acid that the oval-shaped bug produces to fend off predators. So suddenly, there was red, and it was people could get red, and they could paint like. Suddenly, there was a whole new spectrum of color that could be added. Not only that, but supplies were. You could go to a store and you could buy them. Like in the past, painters had to make their own stuff. They had to make their own paint. Maybe they even had to make their own brushes. I mean, they had to figure everything out themselves. By this time, in the early Renaissance, we, as meaning people, had figured out how to actually market paint, make mass-produced paintbrushes, and have like little shops where people could go in. They could say, oh, okay, I'll take, some lapis, and I'll take some, ground up malachite, and, maybe some of the, cochineal stuff. So it's interesting to think about that this common beetle changed history. Literally changed history. Last thing I want to talk about when it comes to bugs is Fort Terry, Plum Island, New York. So Plum Island was used during World War I and World War II as kind of a staging place. I'm not really sure what those guys are doing, but you can see we have some war stuff going on. But then what happened is after World War II, we started Operation Paperclip, which is where we recruited top Nazi scientists in exchange for not putting them to the gas chamber or putting them on trial. And we had a animal disease laboratory in Plum Island, and there was a lab called on the island called Lab 257. And there's a book, I think, of the same name. And it's rumored that there have been biological weapons that have been made within this particular lab, and that Lyme's disease, this is conspiracy theory, this is not proven, Lyme's disease came from Plum Island because deer actually swim. So they would swim to the island and they would swim back to Lyme, Connecticut, which is where the name comes from because that's where it started. And then it spread. And if you look at the timeline of the density of cases, you can actually see it spread in a manner that makes me think that, yeah, maybe there's something to that. Maybe some ticks got loose or something, like, who knows. Now it's a biodiversity place. I don't think they're really sure what to do with it. There's lots of cool birds and stuff on it. But yeah, Plum Island with ticks. Here's another picture of Plum Island. This is the lighthouse keeper. He looks like a real grizzled dude. And now we're gonna go last photo. Remember Justin Jin? We had him in the very first episode. This is another picture that he took that I think is just absolutely beautiful. So I believe they are cleaning mats. I'm not really sure. Next, we're going to talk about Arcane. What is Arcane? I'm glad you asked. Arcane is a structure that was built 4,000 years ago in the middle of the Bronze Age, and it was in the Chebelinks and Orenburg region. So we're talking about, again, like Siberia-ish. And here's the structure. Look at these tiny people. So there was a wall, and then within this circle, each one of these is somebody's house, with the inner circle being the most like that's where like the most important people would live, just like pretty much anywhere else, the most protected or the prettiest. So even though the settlement was burned and abandoned, much detail is preserved. Arcane is similar in form but much better preserved than neighboring Sintasha, where the earliest chariot was unearthed. The site was protected by two circular walls. There was the central square surrounded by two circles of dwellings separated by a street. It covered 220,000 square feet, and then it goes into the entrances, the inner wall, the outer wall. Inner ring of dwellings was 27. Approximately 1,500 to 2,500 people would have lived there. Surrounding the walls were arable fields, and it was recently discovered. I think in 1987 it was discovered. We're going to look at this picture again. Zoroastrianism was a religion that was practiced, like we talked about, Manichaeism. This is another kind of not obscure in the world, but maybe more obscure to certainly to Americans, like not as commonly heard. Now let's look at where it is so that I can be sure that I'm not talking out of my proverbial. Okay, here's Kazakhstan, and here we have, Russia. It is in Russia. Here we have some pictures. The one that I think is really cool is this one right here, because you can see this one's kind of like a Skyrim looking thing, but you can see how it's built. I mean, looking at it overhead is one thing, but I think it's cool to kind of see what it would have looked like, if you were walking up to it. This is like 4,000 years ago. I mean, this is pretty cool stuff. So scientists actually think that this prehistoric city might be older than Stonehenge. Arcane is known as one of the strongest anomaly zones in Russia. But when, why, and by whom was this prehistoric site of unusual circles constructed? I'll put this up in the links, and you can look at it. So, yes, in 1987 was when it was rediscovered. In 1935, somebody flying overhead went, "Hey, what are those circles?" It's a, let's see, what else can I see? There's UFO sightings. People think that there's a positive energy from the Shamanka and Grakanaya Mountains, much like probably Sedona, Arizona. There's probably energy for Texas or whatever. Now, want to get that gift for someone that has everything? Might I suggest a celebrity on a sandwich? This is the thing for someone that would have everything. So I think I would probably choose Ben Affleck because I like to make fun of him. I just do. There's Ben Affleck with his Dunkin' Donuts. And it's an 8x10 watercolor print of Ben Affleck on a sausage, egg, and cheese croissant. Beautiful. Magnificent. Okay, conspiracy theory time. Is the Earth's heartbeat of 7.83 hertz influencing human behavior? So the Earth has sort of like an average oscillation, right? There's lightning and electrical charges, and it has sort of like a wah, 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 wah. This is called the Schumann resonance, and it's a set of frequencies produced by the electromagnetic waves in the Earth's lower ionosphere. So we're talking not outer space, but kind of down in. The frequencies created from thunderstorms and lightning range from 7.83 hertz, called the Earth's heartbeat, to 33.8 hertz. The Schumann resonance has been studied for its effect on the planet as well as on humans. So it's interesting. There are people that track this on a daily basis, and I'll show you that. Let's just talk about Schumann for a minute. Schumann was part of Operation Paperclip. True story. He worked at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Then he went back to Munich, and he started the Electrophysical Institute, where he continued working until he retired at the age of 73. So the Schumann resonance, a global tropical thermometer. It is shown to be a sensitive measure of temperature fluctuations in the tropical atmosphere. The link between the Schumann resonance and temperature is lightning flash rate, which increases non-linearly with temperature and the interaction between deep convection and ice microphysics. I don't don't really feel like paying to get the whole article, but that little snippet, I think, sort of puts it. So the quick Schumann check. This is what the measurements look like. So it's here we have shows the different sort of around the Earth. And there's an actual app that you can get for your Android where you can watch the Schumann Resonance. Why do I keep saying that wrong? Resonance. I guess I'm in a French mood today. These are some new agey things that you could buy for your Schumann enthusiast. So for $3,700, you could buy equipment, a water activator. So there's a subset of people who believe that the water that we drink vibrates at a bad frequency. However, and let me go back. However, there are these things, like here's one right here, where you can take your cup of water in your non-plastic container and put it on this thing and it vibrates. And it vibrates your water from a bad frequency to a good frequency. There are also people that believe that you can sing or bless your water and it changes literally changes the molecular structure. That was kind of covered in a movie called What the Bleep Do We Know About Anything or Everything or something like that. It was like back in the late 90s. It was very popular, but this was talked about a little bit. And now it's kind of gone mainstream. People are like, oh, hey, my water's bad. I don't know. Maybe it is. I do think that we are deeply affected by the resonance of the Earth. And I do think that we are deeply affected by the moon. I mean, if it moves the ocean, why would it not move people? So it's also highly correlated with SGMA sunspots and KP index. Cosmic radiation is transported from the sun to the Earth via ionized plasma and solar wind. This energized plasma affects the Earth's magnetosphere and ionosphere. The physical mechanism is the ionosphere D region ion electron density that varies with the SGMA and forms the upper boundary of the resonant cavity in which the Schumann resonance signal is formed. So you got that. Now, the Schumann resonance affects melatonin. Okay. The brain absorbs it. And then there's a thing called earthing and tree hugging, which improves the human health through tapping into Earth's resonance. So the idea is that you take your feet off and you go walking in the ground barefoot, which I think is kind of a good thing to do every once in a while. Just watch out for ticks. All right, we're getting ready to wrap it up, and I just want to talk about something funny that I saw. And I love gossip. It's kind of a weakness of mine. But I saw this article, and it made me crack up. So if you're sensitive to coarse language, maybe turn away for a minute. But this guy, he was in Fantastic Four, and he claimed his estranged wife, Alice Evans, mocked his saggy vagina eyes. And I just thought that was so funny. You guys probably don't think it's as funny because I'm just showing it randomly, and I'm not going into the whole story and how messy and protracted this has been. But it shows that, it doesn't matter how much money you have or don't have. Like, human nature is human nature. And lastly, we have Laura closed down the link again. Lastly, we have, are the Brits at it again? Yes, our sources have confirmed that the Brits are indeed at it again. It has been 0 days since the Brits were last at it. This is it. This is the site. This is all it does. And I just thought that was very amusing. So it is now 7:42. I need to think about getting on with my day. This was definitely not my best work, but I think it's better. I think it's getting better. And I'll do another one soon. And with that,